My son shoved me so hard against the wall that I saw white. He said if I did not sign over my house and assets, he would make sure I spent the rest of my life fighting lawsuits I could not afford. That house, the one where his mother and I raised him, where every brick held a memory, was suddenly just a property to him. That was the moment I knew he would not just take my home. He wanted to erase me. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Harold Whitman, and I am 74 years old. I have lived in the same house for nearly 5 decades. Every brick, every wooden beam, carries my fingerprints. I laid the foundation with my own 2 hands back in 1977, when my wife, Margaret, and I were still young and foolish enough to think we could conquer the world with nothing but determination and a wheelbarrow full of cement. That house is more than walls and a roof. It is where Margaret and I raised our children, where we hosted Sunday dinners that stretched into the night, where laughter bounced off the kitchen tiles and lullabies drifted down the hall. The oak tree in the backyard still has a crooked tire swing, worn smooth from countless summers of my son and daughter racing each other to climb on. Inside, the hallway bears pencil marks, tiny lines with names and dates, showing the steady growth of my children year after year. When Margaret passed 5 years ago, the house became both my anchor and my ghost. Her handwriting still lingers on recipe cards in the drawer. Her favorite quilt still rests at the foot of the bed. The smell of her lavender perfume sometimes seems to rise from nowhere, stopping me in my tracks. Most men my age move into something smaller, something easier to manage. But I never even considered it. This house is Margaret's last embrace, the last place she truly lived. To leave it would be to lose her all over again. Until recently, I thought my children understood that. My daughter, Caroline, keeps her distance but sends postcards once in a while. My son, Daniel, lives close by. For years, I believed he was the one who still valued family roots. I used to imagine he'd bring his kids here more often, let them play under that oak tree, let them feel connected to where he came from. I thought he respected this house, and me. I was wrong. For a while, Daniel did come around more often. At first, it warmed my heart. He would stop by on Saturday mornings, sometimes with a box of donuts, sometimes with nothing but a quick hello before heading off again. "Dad, you should really think about getting someone to help you with the yard," he said once, leaning on the porch rail as I wrestled with the mower. "You don't need to be out here sweating like a farmhand." I chuckled, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Keeps me alive, son. Better than sitting in front of a television all day." He nodded, but there was something in the way he looked at the house. Not admiration. Calculation. I brushed it off. Another time, he brought up the roof. "Dad, the shingles are curling. You could get a leak. You sure you don't want me to call someone to give you a quote?" "Roof's fine," I said. "I patched it last summer." "Still, it's a lot for you to manage alone. Wouldn't it be easier if you weren't tied down with all this upkeep?" He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't the kind of smile I remembered from his boyhood. This one didn't reach his eyes. It went on like that for weeks. Little comments about how much space the house had, how quiet it was, how lonely it must feel at night. He would trail his fingers along the banister Margaret had polished every spring and murmur things like, "Big place for just one man." Once, while we were in the kitchen, he ran his hand over Margaret's old oak table. "Dad, you know you could cash out while the market's hot. Imagine what you could do with that money." I laughed then, though it came out more hollow than I intended. "What would I do with money, Daniel? Buy another house that doesn't have your mother's handprints all over it." He chuckled awkwardly, but the silence after lingered longer than either of us admitted. At the time, I told myself he was just worried. Maybe he thought I was too stubborn, too set in my ways. I wanted to believe he cared. I wanted to believe he saw me as more than a man clinging to memories. But looking back now, those weren't the words of a caring son. They were trial balloons. Tess. He was planting seeds, hoping I'd water them. And when I didn't, he stopped pretending. It started with a conversation that felt innocent enough. Daniel came over one evening with takeout. Chinese food, our old favorite. He knew I had not been cooking much since Margaret died. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done his homework as a boy, cartons of lo mein and sesame chicken spread between us. He poured himself a beer from my fridge without asking. "Dad," he began between bites, "have you thought about what happens if you get sick again?" I paused, chopsticks halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, feigning casualness. "I mean, last year's pneumonia really scared me. If something like that happens again, you could end up in the hospital for weeks. Who's going to handle things around here?" I smiled faintly. "I've managed fine so far." He shook his head, letting out a sigh like I was a stubborn child. "You don't understand. Bills, maintenance, taxes. It's a lot. You're 74. You shouldn't be worrying about any of that." There was again that undertone. It was not worry. It was impatience dressed as concern. "Daniel," I said softly, "this house has stood with me through everything. It doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like her." He did not answer right away. He just took another sip of beer, his eyes darting across the room, lingering on the photographs that lined the mantel. Margaret smiling in her garden, Caroline at her graduation, Daniel himself at 5 years old holding a fishing rod bigger than him. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, smoother. "I talked to a friend of mine. He's an estate lawyer. He said we could put the house in my name. Just on paper. That way, if anything happens, there won't be a mess with probate or taxes. It's cleaner that way." I set my chopsticks down, suddenly not hungry. "Cleaner for who?" "For everyone," he replied quickly. "For me, for Caroline, for the grandkids. You'd still live here, of course. Nothing would change. It's just smart planning." He reached into his bag and pulled out a manila folder. The sound of it hitting the table was louder than it should have been. He slid it toward me like it was a gift. "What's this?" I asked. "Draft paperwork. Nothing final. Just look it over." I did not touch it. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Daniel," I said slowly, "when your mother and I built this house, we weren't thinking about tax strategies. We were thinking about family, about having a place to belong. You understand that, don't you?" He looked at me for a long moment, and for a split second, I thought I saw hesitation. But then his mouth tightened. He leaned forward, pressing the folder closer. "You're being sentimental. This is about being practical. If you don't sign, you're making things harder for everyone." "Harder for me." The last word slipped out too fast, too sharp. "Not for everyone. For him." I pushed the folder back across the table, slow but steady. "I'll think about it." His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around the edge of his beer bottle. The air between us grew heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. That night, after he left, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at Margaret's photograph. My hand brushed the pencil marks on the doorframe where Daniel's height had been recorded year after year. How could the boy who once begged me for piggyback rides now look at me like prey? I wanted to believe it was just stress, that he had let money cloud his thinking. But deep down I knew better. That night I barely slept. I sat in Margaret's old recliner, the leather cracked and softened by years of her evening reading, and just stared into the dark. The folder Daniel had pushed across the table still sat untouched on the counter. I could almost feel it pulsing in the silence, like a snake coiled and waiting. I thought about the years I had spent in this house. The nights I carried Daniel up these stairs when he fell asleep in the car. The afternoons he and his sister chased each other down this hallway, laughter ringing like music. I remembered patching up his scraped knees, teaching him how to hammer a nail, how to bait a hook, how to be steady even when life rocked you. I had given him everything I knew how to give. And yet, sitting there in the dim glow of the grandfather clock, I realized something ugly. To him, all of that history had been reduced to numbers on a page. A house he could flip, accounts he could drain, an old man he could pressure. Was I really so blind? Did I mistake ambition for love? Or had he always been like this, waiting for the moment when I was weakest to show his true colors? I ran my hand over the arm of the chair, feeling the indent where Margaret's elbow used to rest. She had trusted me to protect what mattered, and I wondered if, in trying to keep the peace, I had already failed her. The house creaked as it always did when the night settled deep, but the sound felt different now. Less like a home, more like a warning. I closed my eyes and told myself one thing, clear as prayer. This isn't over. The night it all snapped, I was at the kitchen table, the house unusually quiet. A single lamp burned above me, casting long shadows across the stacks of unpaid utility bills and the faded blueprints I had been sorting through, remnants of projects Margaret and I once dreamed of finishing together. The clock ticked like a hammer in the silence. Then the front door burst open without so much as a knock. Daniel's footsteps thundered across the hardwood floor, heavy and purposeful. He didn't greet me. He didn't even take off his coat. He strode straight to the table, eyes dark, jaw clenched. Before I could speak, he slammed his hand down on the folder I had left untouched. The sharp crack echoed through the room. He shoved it toward me so hard that the beer bottle I'd been sipping tipped over, spilling amber liquid across the table. "You're signing this tonight," he said, his voice raw, stripped of any pretense of kindness. I reached for a rag to blot the mess, trying to buy a moment of calm. "Daniel?" "Don't Daniel me," he snapped, slamming his palm down again, this time so close to my hand that I flinched. "I've been patient long enough. You'll give me power of attorney, and you'll do it now." I forced my voice steady. "This is my house. My life. You don't get to dictate terms." For a second, silence hung between us like a taut wire. His face twitched, and then something ugly bled through, a fury I had never seen in my boy, not even in his worst tantrums as a child. His eyes narrowed, his lips pulled back in a grimace that barely looked human. "You old fool," he hissed. "You're going to ruin everything if you keep being stubborn." He lunged across the table, his hand clamping down hard on my forearm. The strength in his grip shocked me. It was no longer a son's touch but an enemy's hold. He yanked me up so fast the chair toppled backward, clattering against the tile. Before I could catch my breath, he shoved me hard against the wall. My shoulder struck the wood paneling with a thud that rattled through my bones. Pain shot down my arm. "You'll sign," he spat, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and sour with beer. "Or I'll sue you into the ground. I'll drag your name through court until you're a broken man. I'll prove you're not fit to handle your own affairs, and the judge will hand me everything. The court will believe me. And when I win, I'll take it all anyway." Each word landed like a hammer blow, calculated and cruel. He was not bluffing. He had already thought it through, already imagined my defeat. For a moment, the house seemed to vanish. The familiar photographs on the wall, the scent of lavender from Margaret's quilt, the hum of the refrigerator. All I could see was Daniel's twisted face, the son I had raised, now a stranger, pressing me against the same walls that had once protected him from nightmares. I felt my knees trembling, but not from weakness. No, it was something else rising in me, something older, sharper. A heat I hadn't felt in years. My fear was already hardening into something stronger, something rising from the pit of my stomach like molten iron. For the first time in years, I felt my spine stiffen. But before I could anchor myself, Daniel's hand shot to my collar. With a guttural sound, half growl, half roar, he slammed me against the wall again, harder this time. My head cracked against the paneling with a dull thud. White stars burst across my vision, and the world tilted sideways. The breath left my lungs in a single sharp gasp. My knees buckled, but he pinned me there, forearm crushing across my chest. "Stop fighting me," he snarled. "Why do you make everything so damn difficult?" His face was a blur inches from mine, jaw working furiously, sweat glistening at his temple. His words came fast, jagged, each one slicing into me. "You don't know what you're doing anymore. You're weak, confused, half the time you can't even keep your medicine straight. I'm saving you from yourself. Do you get that? Or do I need to beat it into your skull?" I wanted to answer, to tell him I wasn't weak, that my mind was sharper than he imagined. That Margaret had trusted me, not him, to safeguard this house. But the pressure on my chest turned every thought into fragments, every word into dust in my throat. My hands clawed at his arm, searching for air, for leverage. The wall was cold and unyielding at my back, the same wall where Margaret's family photos still hung in neat rows. One picture trembled from the impact, a framed portrait of her holding Daniel as a newborn, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. The irony burned deeper than the pain. My vision blurred again, dark creeping at the edges. His words blended into noise, spit landing on my cheek as he spat out his rage. I could barely think, barely breathe. The only thought that pierced the haze was not of surrender. It was Margaret's voice, steady, patient, whispering the last thing she ever asked of me, "Take care of him." But right then, crushed against the wall by the same son I had raised, another thought pushed harder, sharper, louder, "Or take care of yourself before he destroys you both." Then, just as abruptly as it began, Daniel's grip loosened. His forearm lifted from my chest, his fist unclenched from my collar. I stumbled forward, catching myself against the wall, gasping for air. My knees shook so violently I thought they might give out. Daniel stepped back, chest heaving, eyes wild. For a moment I thought he might strike again, but instead he cursed under his breath, grabbed the folder off the table, and stormed toward the door. The slam of it echoed through the house like a gunshot, rattling the frame. Then came silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but fractured, shards of glass on the floor of my memory. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself. My heart hammered so hard I felt each beat in my throat. The room swam, shadows bending, until I forced myself to focus on something solid. Margaret's photograph, still hanging crooked on the wall, her smile frozen in time. My son had just put his hands on me. My son. The boy I had carried in these very arms. The thought twisted like a knife, but it did not cut me down. It sharpened me, because if he could do this once, he could do it again. And next time, he would not stop at shoving. I sank into Margaret's recliner, lungs still dragging in ragged breaths. Confusion tangled with rage, with grief, with something harder, resolve. I could not outmuscle him. I could not outshout him. But there were other ways. I thought of the fireproof box under the floorboards, the one with every deed, every receipt, every document I had ever safeguarded. I thought of the lawyer who had handled Margaret's estate with precision and loyalty. I thought of restraining orders, trusts, protections that could wrap around me like armor. Daniel wanted to use the courts to strip me bare. Fine. Let him try. Because I would be there first, documents in hand, truth at my back. Weak as I felt in that moment, bruises forming under my shirt, I knew something with absolute certainty. This house, my memories, my life, he would not take them. Not through fists. Not through lies. Not through any judge's gavel. He had declared war on his own father. And though my body trembled, my spirit was already standing tall. Morning came, not gently but like a blow. My body ached as though I had aged 10 years overnight. My shoulder throbbed from the impact with the wall, and when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, a faint bruise was already blooming along my collarbone where Daniel's arm had pressed me down. I showered slowly, wincing at every movement, then dressed with deliberate care. Slacks, a clean shirt, the jacket Margaret had once said made me look like a man who won't be pushed around. Before anything else, I drove to the hospital. The nurse raised her eyebrows when she saw the discoloration on my chest and the swelling at the back of my head. Fall? She asked gently, clipboard poised. I held her gaze. No. My son. The words tasted like iron, but I did not swallow them. I let them stand, because silence had been my mistake too many times before. They ran tests, scanned my head for fractures, checked my blood pressure. Nothing broken, thank God. But the doctor warned me firmly, you can't let yourself be in that situation again. This isn't just about your health. It's about your safety. I nodded, already ahead of him. From the hospital, I drove straight downtown, the morning traffic a blur of horns and red lights. My destination, the office of James Whitaker, the lawyer who had handled Margaret's will. A man I trusted, not because he was charming, but because he was thorough, steady, and owed me no favors he could later collect. He ushered me into his office, concern flickering across his face when he saw me wince as I sat down. Harold, what happened? I told him everything. Not in anger, not even in sorrow, but in cold detail. The folder. The shoving. The threats. Every word Daniel had hissed at me. James listened without interrupting, his pen scratching notes. When I finished, he leaned back, exhaling. First things first, we file for a restraining order. If he sets foot here again with violence in mind, he'll be in violation of the law. I nodded. And the house? He gave a thin smile. The house is safe, Harold. You placed it in trust years ago. He can't touch it without your consent, but we'll make it stronger. Ironclad. We'll add medical power of attorney provisions, designate a proxy you trust, someone other than him. If he tries to drag you into court, it'll fall apart before it begins. Relief washed through me, but it was not enough. I leaned forward. James, I want him to know. I want Daniel to walk into that courtroom, papers in hand, thinking he's already won, and then I want him to watch it crumble. For the first time in all the years I'd known him, James smiled with something close to satisfaction. Then let's make sure he gets exactly what he's asking for. As I left the office, the city air felt different. Brighter, sharper. My body was still sore, my heart still heavy. But for the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt something she would recognize in me: fight. And if Daniel thought he could break me with his hands, he was about to learn how much stronger paper, ink, and the truth could be. The next few weeks became a campaign. Every morning started the same. Coffee brewed strong, Margaret's quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and a checklist on the table. No more drifting through the days, no more hoping things would smooth themselves out. Daniel had drawn his battle lines. I was drawing mine. First came the paperwork. With James's help, I went through every file I had ever tucked away in the fireproof box beneath the floorboards. Deeds, mortgage receipts, tax statements going back decades. I sorted, copied, and cataloged until every detail of my life was bulletproof. I updated my will, drafted medical directives, appointing my longtime friend and neighbor, Walter, as my decision-maker if I were ever incapacitated. Daniel's name vanished from every document where it once lingered. It felt like rewriting history with ink sharper than any blade. Next came the physical protections. I had the locks changed on every door. A security system installed with cameras that watched every corner of the property. At night, the blinking red lights were a quiet reassurance. I wasn't helpless, not anymore. The doctor's warning stayed with me too. So I joined a senior fitness program at the local YMCA, not for vanity but for survival. 3 mornings a week, I stretched, strengthened, and walked the track until my lungs burned clean. The bruises Daniel left faded, but my resolve hardened with every mile. Neighbors noticed. Walter, the same man who used to share beers with me after mowing the lawn, came over one evening. He stood on my porch, looking uneasy. "Harold," he said, "your boy's been asking around. About the house. About your health. He came by last week, asking me if I thought you could still handle living here alone." I swallowed hard but forced myself to smile. Let him ask. He'll get his answers soon enough. Walter nodded slowly, then added, "You've always been fair. But don't mistake fairness for weakness. He already crossed that line once." His words echoed long after he left. At night, when the house settled into silence, I sometimes caught myself staring at Margaret's photograph, asking her silently if I was doing the right thing. Each time, the memory of her final words, "Take care of him," clashed against Daniel's hands, shoving me into the wall. The answer became clearer with every passing day. Taking care of him now meant protecting myself, protecting what she and I built, and protecting the part of our family that still remembered what love looked like. So when James called to tell me Daniel had filed the first official suit, elder incompetence, requesting guardianship over me and my estate, I didn't panic. I didn't tremble. I simply opened my folder, thick with evidence, and whispered to myself, "Let him come." The week before the hearing, my house looked less like a home and more like a war room. Papers covered the dining table where Sunday roasts once steamed. File folders sat in neat stacks, each one marked with careful labels: deeds, taxes, medical, correspondence. James came by twice that week, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad, drilling me with questions the way a coach tests his player before the championship game. "What will you say when they ask about your health?" "That I live alone, cook my own meals, drive myself to every appointment." "And if they bring up the pneumonia?" "I'll tell them I recovered fully and have documentation from my doctor." "And if Daniel claims you're confused with money?" I tapped the stack of bank statements, organized down to the cent, then I'll show them I've balanced my accounts every month for 30 years without a single overdraft. James leaned back, smiling faintly. "You're ready." Still, the nights before the trial were heavy. I walked the house in silence, running my fingers along the banister Margaret had polished, the door frame still etched with my children's heights. I whispered to her photograph in the hallway, "This isn't just about me, love. It's about keeping your memories safe from being sold like a cheap asset." The morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best suit. The one Margaret insisted I buy for Caroline's wedding years ago. Black wool, pressed clean. I pinned my old army tie clip to my shirt, not because it mattered in court, but because it steadied me. When I stepped into the courtroom, Daniel was already there. He wore a sharp navy suit and a smirk that looked rehearsed. His lawyer, slick-haired and younger than my grandchildren, whispered in his ear like they'd already won. Daniel didn't look at me as I took my seat. He looked past me as if I were already gone. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Daniel's lawyer went first, painting me as frail, confused, and unfit to manage my affairs. He spoke of safety concerns, of financial missteps, of decline due to age. Every sentence dripped with false concern, and every now and then, Daniel would glance toward the gallery, shaking his head like a man grieving over a burden too heavy to carry. When it was my turn, James rose calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like steel. "Your Honor, the petitioner paints a picture of incompetence. The evidence will show otherwise." One by one, he presented the documents we'd prepared. Clean medical reports, bank statements in perfect order, deeds secured in a living trust with my signature dated years before Daniel's scheme began. Then James called me to the stand. The oath felt heavier than I expected, but as I sat there, the words came easier than I thought they would. I told the judge about my daily life, my routines, my responsibilities, my independence. I spoke clearly, without stumbling, without confusion. When Daniel's lawyer tried to rattle me, asking about dates, I answered with precision. When he pressed about the pneumonia, I handed him the doctor's report. Every attempt to paint me as weak only highlighted the truth. I was prepared, and I was not alone. Finally, James leaned in. "Mr. Whitman, why is this house so important to you?" The courtroom hushed. My throat tightened, but I spoke anyway. "Because my wife and I built it together. Because every corner holds a piece of our lives. Because my grandchildren deserve to visit a place that is more than just a property line on a ledger. It's a home, and it will remain a home long after I'm gone. What it will not be is leverage for anyone's greed." I didn't look at Daniel, but I could feel the heat of his glare. When the judge finally spoke, her words were measured, firm. She dismissed Daniel's petition for guardianship, citing lack of evidence, strong proof of my competence, and, though she didn't say it directly, the transparent nature of his motives. Daniel sat frozen, his smirk long gone. His lawyer shuffled papers aimlessly, already defeated. I stood slowly, my body still aching, but my spirit tall. For the first time in months, I felt Margaret beside me, as though she were whispering from the quiet corners of the house. "You kept your promise." As I walked past Daniel, I didn't look down, didn't gloat. I simply placed a hand on the polished railing of the courtroom steps, steady and sure, and kept walking forward. When I returned home from court that afternoon, the house felt different. Not lighter, not freer. Those words would have belonged to a younger man. No, what I felt was steadiness, as though the old beams themselves had leaned in to remind me they were still mine, still standing. I set my jacket over Margaret's chair and walked slowly through each room. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. The sun cut across the hallway, warming the pencil marks where Daniel's height had been etched year by year. For the first time since his hands had driven me into that wall, I touched those lines without flinching. They were part of my past, but they would not decide my future. That evening, James came by with one final set of papers. The trust was updated, airtight. The will was complete, naming Emily as the one to inherit the home, bypassing Daniel entirely. I signed the last page with a steady hand. "There," James said softly, sliding the folder closed. "It's done." 2 days later, Daniel showed up unannounced. He stood on the porch, shoulders tense, eyes burning with the kind of rage only a man cornered by his own schemes can carry. "Dad, you don't understand." I opened the door just enough for him to see me, but not enough for him to step inside. My voice was calm, level. "No, Daniel. You don't understand. This house isn't yours. It never will be. And you won't touch it again. If you try, there are laws now that will keep you away." His mouth opened, ready to spit venom, but I raised my hand. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but you've lost the right to call this place your home. That was your choice, not mine." The words struck him harder than any shove he'd given me. For the first time, I saw him falter. His lips pressed tight, his shoulders slumped, and then he turned, walking back down the steps without another word. I watched him go, the sound of his footsteps fading into the dusk. When the gate clicked shut, I closed the door firmly, the lock sliding into place with a finality that felt less like ending and more like closure. That night, I sat in Margaret's chair, a cup of tea warming my hands. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't stalk me. It settled gently, like an old friend laying a blanket across my shoulders. I had won, but not without loss. My son's betrayal would always ache, like a bruise beneath the skin. Yet as I looked toward the mantel, at the photograph of Margaret holding our granddaughter Emily as a baby, I found peace in knowing one thing. The home we built, the love we poured into these walls, would live on where it belonged, and greed would never touch it again.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.